Hey everybody, it's Drew with DrewFab here again. So I wanted to expand on some stuff that I talked about last time in my last video. So last time we talked about tolerancing and parts and kind of how the two go together and really what those mean. And I talked about some measurements and specifically with calipers. And I wanted to expand upon that and give some background and understand why I said some of the things that I said and why what you would use for different applications, things like that, what the tools are. So obviously, I'm going to start from kind of least precise to most, and go to most precise. So obviously, standard tape measure, nothing special. So this is a big contractor tape measure, big ass one. They're good. I like them. The thing I like for these is when you're spanning like a roll cage, you're trying to take a measurement from side to side. These are awesome because they don't flop, they don't fold, they don't fall over. So you can. I work by myself a lot, so not having a second set of hands has kind of made me learn how to work with, get the right tools for what I'm doing. So I like these for that. For when you're doing tube notching, things like that, and you're measuring stuff that needs to be a little more precise, or you've got to get into a tighter spot, the smaller 10-footers are my favorites. Actually, the little Stanley ones are my favorites. So the next one is this. So this is a scale here. You might call it a ruler. They come in a couple different sizes. This little guy here, this big guy here. This is I believe a 24-incher. Yeah, it's a 24-inch one. So these are pretty cool, and the reason they're called a scale is beyond me. I don't know. It's a ruler effectively. But what they do is they show measurements in a little different ways than what your standard ruler does. So your standard ruler might have like eighths, quarters, sixteenths, something like that, right? These ones are different. So one side of this one, I want to make sure I read this right. So this one has 30 seconds and 16ths on one side. I don't know if you can see that or not. I'm sorry, 30 seconds and 64ths. And then the other side, it has hundredths and tenths on it. And so what that does is that allows, and there's little itty bitty, you can probably see them as a fog, but there's little itty bitty lines on in between the hundredths. And so what that does is that allows you to get pretty close. Like if you're trying to do, let's say, 2 5/8 is a length on a piece of bar stock that you're cutting. Instead of grabbing your calipers and scribing a line and so on and so forth, you can grab your scale, you can put it up there, and you can kind of eyeball it and get it pretty dang close. 2 5/8, or it would be 2.625. So you go, so if you're on the hundreds, you go 2.6 and then kind of 25, kind of eyeball it. So they work really good for that kind of stuff. I use them extensively. I use them for straight edges, use them for all sorts of different things, for scribing lines, all sorts of stuff, right? So the next thing is calipers. So these are actually a perfect example of why calipers are not a great tool to measure things precisely. So I don't know if you've noticed, but with the exception of my 2 scales here and the ruler or the tape measure that I actually use, these are all my cheap China tools. The ones that I carry around the shop and I don't worry about dropping them because I'm not going to carry my Starretts or my Minitoyas around and drop them. I'd have a heart attack. So these are a pair of $20 calipers that you can get off of Amazon. I think I got them off of eBay. But they are a perfect example of why calipers are not a great tool for measuring things precisely. So I don't know if you can really see it well, but when you pull the dial back, or when you push on the dial, or on the wheel, I'm sorry, the dial moves. And that's because, and it's hard, you can't see it from here, if you actually close the jaws all the way and you look through these, you can see daylight. And so good calipers obviously are better than that. You can get, $200 Mitutoyo calipers that don't do that. However, the rule of thumb when it comes to measurements is you want to have a tool that's 10 times the precision of what you're measuring. So if you're measuring something to an inch and you have something that can measure down to the 10th of an inch, let's say a scale, right? Right, scale. So if you're measuring down to the 10th of an inch, then that's perfectly acceptable. So if your precision needs to be 100 thousandths, a 10th of an inch, then you can grab a scale and do it. Now, if you need to go down to 10 thousandths, then a pair of calipers, a good pair of calipers, is perfectly acceptable because a pair of calipers have a precision of 1/1000th of an inch. So each mark on the dial corresponds to 1/1000th of an inch. Now, when you get down into the 1/1000ths range, that's when you need to grab a micrometer. So that kind of leads me to this. So this is a cheap, this is actually a Harbor Freight micrometer, nothing special. It's got this little dial here it's kind of cool if you don't know how to read a vernier or don't know how to actually read it, kind of this cheap way of doing it. But they're kind of neat. It's good for someone that's starting out that you really don't know what you're doing. It's a good way to get into it. I think they're like 20 bucks. So perfect. But this is what you want is a micrometer. And again, these come in all sorts of sizes too. So you can get calipers all the way up to like 6 feet long. And then micrometers, you can get these huge micrometers. I personally have only up to 9 inches on a micrometer, but you can get them massive. And so micrometers do two things. So typically, a good micrometer, and this is not a good one, but this one does too, will measure down to the 10,000ths of an inch. Okay, so if a thousandths is 0.001 or 000, the 1 would be the thousandths, then a 10,000ths would be 0.0001. Okay, so 10 times more precise. So if we're measuring something down to the thousandths, micrometer. Okay, if you're going beyond that, email me. We'll have a different conversation. Or you might need a CMM or an ATOS scanner or something else. So that's a whole other discussion. And so what micrometers can do, obviously, like I said, is down to the thousandths of an inch. And so if you look at this one's actually a little bit dirty and whatnot, and it's not reading great anymore. But it's hard to see, but there's little numbers right here. So you have your line with your 0, and you got these little numbers up here. Those little numbers up there are how you get to the 10,000ths of an inch measurement. And so that's why when you're looking at, tolerancing and things like that, when you're talking about like a crankshaft or something, or things of that nature, and you're trying to measure down to the thousandths, grabbing a pair of calipers, is not the right way to do it, because you're only going to get something that's good down to the thousandths. And if you're measuring something that's 1 or even 2 or 3 or 5 thousandths, and you've got a thousandths of variation, you're not going to get a real accurate measurement. You get something that's wrong. And so finally, on my table here in my studio is a dial indicator. Again, cheap, China. I think this is a Harbor Freight one as well. So these are super useful in a lot of ways. Depends on what you're doing. Like if you're setting up gears, you need one of these. Setting up, you're dropping a crankshaft into an engine, you're checking in play on the crankshaft, you're trying to check in play on a camshaft, you're trying to do whatever, you're checking slop in a chain drive, all sorts of stuff. These are really helpful, not just for machining parts. I use them all the time for making sure things are flat and square and run out and things like that in the machine shop, but you can use these in places that have nothing to do with machining, just have to do with assembling stuff. They're great if you have like a table center where you've got, you can put a shaft in it. You can check if it's out of round, it's got a jump rope in it. You can set one of these bad boys up and you can see it move up and down with the thing and see if it's got run out. So these are super helpful. But again, this is so the cheap ones. Typically, your cheap ones are only going to go down to 1,000ths of an inch. A little bit more expensive one might go to 5/10. I don't know that I've ever seen a big one like this go down to 10,000ths, but I'm sure they're out there. If you want to go down to the 10,000ths of an inch, you need to go to a test indicator, which is a different type of instrument. I don't have one out here, but they're still widely available, and those get a little more pricey as you get up in the range there. So I hope this was informative. This is kind of a snapshot into some of the tools that I use, some of the measurement tools that I use, and talking about why you would use one or the other, and why you might only need a pair of calipers, or why you might only need a scale. So one piece of advice that I would like to offer, I've had a lot of people recently ask me about, should I buy a pair of Mitutoyo Absolute calipers? Those are the digital, really expensive. They're, for me, really expensive. They're like $200 for their cheap ones, which are the 6-inch ones. Their 12-inch ones are over $400. I don't think if you're getting started out and you're doing fabrication, you're doing light type work, you're just checking stuff, not worth your money. You can spend a lot less money and still get the same kind of accuracy. Even a cheap, crappy micrometer is going to be able to measure, especially if you take care of it, is going to be able to measure what you're trying to do. So my recommendation would be get a couple pairs of cheap, crappy calipers that you can drop and break, and they're $20 and you're not worried about hurting them. And then go get you a good micrometer if you can afford it, or go get some cheap micrometers, and a pair of set of telescoping gauges. Because if you have those things, you can check inside and outside of whatever size you want. And as long as you have something that's reasonably precise and you know how to use them appropriately, then you can get good measurements. You don't need to have the highest quality, highest end stuff to be able to get good measurements. A lot of it is how you use it. Now, if you're a guy building race engines, you're a guy that's doing super highly precision stuff, absolutely, you need high quality stuff. For what I'm doing, I need some high quality tools here and there too. But vast majority of people don't need to go spend $1,000 on a couple of pairs of calipers and a couple of micrometers. It's just not, the value's not there. Harbor Freight, whatever, China, eBay, they work, they're good. I don't like them personally. I don't like importing stuff. I like American-made stuff. That's why I got my Starrett and all that. However, for the vast majority of people, you can get it done with those things. So, hope it was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.